You won't believe some of the things people have reported me to my regulator about. They literally want me disbarred, disciplined, fined, punished, whatever, for expressing my opinion sometimes, and sometimes not even that. Sometimes just telling people what the law is and that it might cause confusion. And also in this video, the police, by banning a UKIP protest, might be breaking the law. Whilst they try to skirt around it, there's hidden wording in the middle of their announcement here. They try to skirt around the fact that they might be breaking the law to try to get them out of it, off the hook, and to say that actually they're not breaking the law. Here's the explanation. And it really comes to something when the police have got to do this long-winded explanation as to why they've banned this protest, because it might cause violent repercussions by other people. So more about that in the second half of the video. But first half of the video, I felt it absolutely necessary, unironically, to give you my views and express my opinions on why people think I shouldn't have views and opinions and I shouldn't be able to express those. And they report me for it. They literally expressly say this guy should be disciplined and disbarred and all the rest of it. And I find it somewhat tiring in one sense. But in another sense, a few people have said over the last few years that unless someone is criticizing you, then you're not being successful. You're not doing very well. So I take it as sort of par for the course, and this is just necessary. But here we go. And I suppose with hundreds of millions of views on my channels here, please do subscribe, by the way. Thank you very much. I suppose it's inevitable that the very, very tiny, teeny minority will complain about me. But for some of the reasons you'll find really bizarre. It's literally almost like someone complimenting you on your dress, your attire, and then them complaining that you've made comment on their dress or attire. It's really that silly sometimes. Now, I'm not ridiculing anybody here, but I think these are really unnecessary, unwarranted, and just out of order. Thankfully, at the moment, my regulator has always sort of upheld my right to the freedom of expression, which is sort of really what this is all about, even on the police thing, which I'll come back to in the second half of the video. But in no particular order, in fact, I will go in order. The first one I'm going to find, I've got a list here. I'm not going to show you the letters or anything like that, because, they were sent in, private and confidential and so on. Whilst there's no absolute legal obligation for me to keep them private, all I'm going to do is tell you about them rather than show you the letters. But let me find one of them in particular, because this was one of the first complaints. So it's a few years ago now. But one of the first complaints someone made to my regulator about me was simply this, that they were concerned that I did a YouTube video talking about the changes in the highway code. You might remember that video. In essence, it meant that drivers have to stop and allow people to cross the road if they look like they're about to cross the road or they're waiting to cross the road. Vehicles must stop and let them cross the road. Now, it's not even that I disagree with that. I think, yeah, that's a good thing to do. I mean, I do that. I do stop and let people cross the road. I couldn't tell you now precisely the wording that I said then, so it might change very slightly now. That's sort of the way these things work. But I maintain the view that it causes confusion, which is what I said then. I said this will cause confusion. I think chaos is probably the word I used, and I think it will cause chaos. I still think that today. I do that, and I do, if I see someone waiting to cross, I follow the highway code, and I do stop, and I let them cross. I get cars beeping me from behind. What are you doing? Because I've stopped to let someone cross the road. Anyway, I did a video talking about that, and I seem to recall that just by saying that it was going to cause some confusion, that there was obviously a bit of split debate in the comments of whether this was a good idea or not. Nonetheless, somebody wrote into my regulator. They took the time to find it and write into my regulator and complained that I did a video about this and said that I should be disciplined for talking about the changes in the highway code and that I thought that it was going to cause some difficulty. Now, I think that's just a bit odd, frankly, that someone took the time to do that. But that was one of the first complaints that I had. More recently, talking about political issues and government issues and things like that, which granted has, served to grow my channel somewhat. And then you get, some people that don't like either my political opinion or any political opinion, or they don't like the fact that I talk about politics at all, start criticizing me everywhere and whatever, which I don't care. I mean, if they've got the time to waste criticizing me on some forum, that's down to them. But those that write into the regulator are on another level. And so here's a few examples. Again, no particular order, but there's a few examples here that you might find a little bit bizarre. One of them wrote and complained that I made comment about a defendant who was prosecuted for the very serious sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. My comment and criticism, if you like, was the fact that he was given a suspended sentence. Now, he really shouldn't have, and I maintain that view, he shouldn't have been given a suspended sentence. I don't care how old he was, and I don't care what his excuses were. That is an imprisonable offence. He should not have been given a suspended sentence. I maintain that view today. And in any event, that's just my view. Now, interestingly, the complainant said that this was not about the case, but the fact that I had identified the defendant. Just the fact that I identified the defendant in my video, that's what the complaint was, and therefore I should be somehow disciplined or whatever, even disbarred, right? But think about this for a moment. How do they think that I found out about this in the first place? Not only is it a public justice system, i.e., once someone is being prosecuted for something, it is public record, it's public knowledge. And once they are, going through that process and the police publish a mugshot, that photograph is public as well. And obviously the news companies jump all over it. They write stories about it, their face and everything. It's splattered across the news everywhere. But because I talked about it, they felt that I should be disciplined for it. I have no idea why. I maintain the view that he shouldn't have got a suspended sentence. But even then, they said the complainant said it's not about the case. So what is it that they disagree with? The fact that I identified a defendant that is in the public justice system that splattered all over the news? They just didn't like the fact that I mentioned it. I found that really bizarre. Suffice to say, my regulator didn't agree, and they said that there was nothing to discipline me over because freedom of expression. In each and every one of these cases, they've responded and said, I have the right under Article 10 to freedom of expression, and it is highly protected if it's political and that sort of speech. Another complainant said that I oversimplified legal matters and commented on judges and the judiciary. And even though the complainant accepted that I have freedom of expression, they said that I shouldn't be able to do so as a barrister, which is contradictory in itself, which again, it's really quite bizarre. But again, the regulator responded in exactly the same way. There was another one where a complainant, again, another complaint here, another one where I made some comment on X. Now, this will split the room somewhat, but there was this whole thing where they were pushing for someone who is not a trans person, that they should be referred to as cisgender or cis for short, or non-trans. And I found that really bizarre. And so I responded on X to the effect that that's ridiculous. And I am not cis or cisgender or non-trans. I'm just a normal man was exactly what I wrote in that post. But again, this complainant felt that I shouldn't be able to say that. I should be somehow disciplined for saying that. Again, freedom of expression, my free speech, my right to say so. Now, you may have seen in the news that the government is now looking at banning social media for under 16-year-olds, despite previously saying they wouldn't want to do that. Now, apparently, maybe another U-turn, they've softened on the idea, and they are in fact looking at banning social media for under 16s. Now, aside from what you think about under 16s using social media, I mean, many people might say that's the parent's job to sort of parent, I suppose, whether they use that and whether they are safe on there and so on. Regardless of all that, there's a couple of things at issue. Is that really viable for the government to ban it and enforce such a ban, or are we just becoming a nanny state? And what's the reason for it? Now, there is a valid reason for it, and it's the reason for this little interjection here, because one of the reasons for it is that we've been approached by a lot of parents who've now got into a position where they've got images and videos and such of their children being shared on social media that they don't want. And many of these things are on social media and they really don't want them there. Now, there's a number of things you can do about this. Alongside filing privacy complaints and such, you can use a company with whom I partner on this channel called Incogni, which is set up as an automated service for online privacy, personal safety, and they are specialized in removing your information when you've perhaps overshared or companies have collected your data on the internet or further afield. It is an automated service whereby they contact hundreds of companies and request and require under law that they remove your data from their services and thus from the internet. So essentially helping you to disappear from the internet, where you feel you or perhaps even your children have shared your addresses, your phone numbers, your email addresses that you just simply don't want out there on the internet anymore. And of course, as a partner to my channel, you get a 60% discount off the annual plan using my code BlackBelt, which I'll link in the description below. And you get access to a dashboard so you can see just how many companies start to remove your data under the law, and you can have that peace of mind knowing that you are slowly being erased from the internet. So check out Incognito with my code BlackBelt for 60% off the annual plan. I'll link that below. Another one. Now, this is really bizarre. Now, this is bizarre in the sense that the complainant completely missed the point, or they didn't watch the full video, because had they watched the full video, they would realize that I was debunking the very thing that I was talking about that got people all upset and sort of rage bait and whatever. So if they'd have watched the full video, they'd have probably agreed with me. In fact, I've had conversations with people who've said, "Oh, actually, you've come out and debunked this myth." Now, it was about this. The video was about the myth, if you like, that Muslims don't pay council tax because they get some sort of loophole council tax exemption on their property for a place of religious worship or whatever. It's nonsense, right? That's not how it works. It does apply to religious buildings, and there are certain protocols and procedures and whatever, but that would apply regardless of the religion, etc. And there are specific circumstances it applies. I'll try and find that video, or you can just Google it, and Google's got a good way of finding my videos, where I was debunking that as a myth, right? It doesn't work like that. But nonetheless, this complainant said that I was targeting Muslims in that video, even though I was debunking this sort of myth that people use to criticize them, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with people using things like that to criticize them. You know, that's just not called for. But they said because of that I was targeting Muslims, and literally said to my regulator that I should be disbarred. Literally in the report said that I should be disbarred and disciplined for it, even though the video was debunking that as a myth. Really bizarre. Other complaints have focused on me giving a personal opinion on legal matters, and another strange one, matters unrelated to the UK's legal system. Therefore, for some reason, I shouldn't be able to talk about matters that are nothing to do with the UK's legal system. And another one, the fact that within the same complaint this was, the fact that I talked about Axel Rudakabana, that monster who killed those girls. The fact that I talked about and identified him, they said that I shouldn't be able to do that either. This was really bizarre because, again, they want me to be disciplined or disbarred just for talking about these things. And again, the regulator replied to say, I have the freedom of expression. I can do those things, particularly if it's relating to politics. And whether it's to do with the UK legal system or not is completely irrelevant, quite frankly. Another really bizarre post. Now, I was pleased that the regulator actually looked into depth on this one, because it's quite offensive when people do say things like this. Another report accused me of being racist and homophobic. Now, I find this, again, utterly bizarre, because given the fact that most of my friends and colleagues are from various backgrounds and nationalities, my wife's Chinese, therefore my son is half Chinese. Most of my friends are from other countries or other nationalities or whatever. Some of my best friends are gay. I don't think I should have to say these things. I don't think I should have to convince you of these things, but it's true, so I say it anyway. But suffice to say, the regulator reviewed all the material and they said, well, we don't agree that anything he said was racist or homophobic. So I'm very grateful to that, because I would find that really bizarre if someone did that. But there we go. Another complaint raised because I criticised the government, obviously, the decisions that they made, and therefore that I shouldn't be able to state those things as a barrister. I shouldn't be able to, question decisions made by the government as a barrister. But again, that was another one where the regulator said this is political speech and it's highly protected under Article 10. Another one really bizarre is a complainant wrote to the regulator, complained that I had Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, on my channel for interview. This is when he was detained in Canada. And I had him on to give his side of the story because the media, in my view, wasn't giving you the full picture. So I thought, what better way? I think I used that exact phrase. I think, what better way to have you on and, say it yourself? And so he came on and he gave an account of what was really happening on the ground where he was. And so this complainant felt that I really shouldn't have Tommy Robinson on my channel, and said that there was a strong case for me to be investigated under prevent legislation because Tommy Robinson was on my channel for interview, and again, somehow I should be disciplined for it. Again, just a really bizarre thing. Another complaint, again, was about me expressing political opinions. I've literally got a collection of these complaints, by the way. I've got a folder called complaints now. Another one about me expressing political opinions on X, saying that I shouldn't be able to do so. But again, with all of those, I'm very pleased to say that the regulator has said that my political views expressed in my non-professional life and matters of public interest are protected by Article 10 and attract the highest level of protection for freedom of expression under the European Convention on Human Rights. And thus, they concluded in each of these that there's no breach of the handbook rules or the social media guidance that they've put out. And so, effectively, all of these attempts to stifle my free speech, especially on political issues, are all fallen flat. So I think that's really bizarre, but I just thought I'd share that with you, because when you put yourself out on a platform like this and you have millions, hundreds of millions of views, you do obviously get a tiny minority of people that just don't like you to talk. They don't like you to talk at all. And if you do, they sometimes don't like what you say, and therefore they argue that you shouldn't be allowed to say it. Again, I find that utterly bizarre. But over the channel lifetime, just for this main channel alone, almost 250 million views, there's bound to be a few people that don't like what I say. But speaking of free speech, let's go now to the police banning this UKIP protest. Now, again, like for the avoidance of doubt, this is not me being a UKIP fan or a right way. Oh yeah, another complaint which I didn't mention was in my list. I skipped it, but another complaint said that I follow some right-wing accounts on X and therefore should be disciplined. Really bizarre. But so this is not me, being a UKIP supporter or whatever. I'm talking to you about the police, the Met Police here, banning this UKIP protest due to take place in Whitechapel, and it's now to take place elsewhere, which is part of the reason they're trying to skirt the breaking of the law. It may well still be unlawful just by forcing it to move, and I'll tell you why in this video. But here was the initial post, which they obviously got some backlash for, and then realized that it wasn't a sufficient explanation, so they came back with a long-winded one. But their original post read as this: "We reasonably believe, based on the information available and on previous similar incidents, that the coming together of the UKIP protests with groups who are opposed to its presence would be highly likely to lead to violence and serious disorder." Now, they don't name any groups, but it's obvious, there are obvious groups in those areas that would be opposed to UKIP. That is obvious. And again, that is not a contentious thing to say. It's just a fact. And they said it would be reckless to allow an event to go ahead in this location, in these circumstances. So we've used our powers to require it to take place elsewhere. Just pausing for thought there for a moment. We have the right to the freedom of expression, Article 10, and the right to the freedom of assembly under Article 11. And so all-encompassing, that is the right to peaceful protest, and even including the expression that some people might find, objectionable and so on and so forth. The question really to think about while I read these out to you, the question is, at what point can the authority curtail your rights just because something might happen, and by whom? That's the pertinent question here, and that's why they might be breaking the law. It goes on. "We are not doing so on the grounds of politics. We are not even doing so on the grounds of whether people will be offended or not by UKIP's presence." Now that's questionable, because I think clearly the only reason there would be violence and serious disorder is if people are offended by it. So I think you can't just say that and it be fact. That is an opinion there. That is just, it's a hearsay opinion by the Met Police on the internet. It carries no weight whatsoever, with respect. They say we are doing so solely based on our risk assessment for serious disorder. Now, the risk assessment for serious disorder must be based on intelligence that said groups, opposing groups, are likely to cause violence and serious disorder, along with UKIP. It won't just be one group or the other. It'll be the coming, as they put it, the coming together of these groups. But even to ban it or even to move it is a serious slippery slope. It's basically the police saying, we can't keep you safe anymore, which is a real slippery slope. It's a dangerous precedent to set. Actually, it's already been set because they did the same in October. The protest can still take place elsewhere, as it did last time. If UKIP will engage with our teams, we are confident a less provocative location that avoids the risk of serious disorder can be identified. But then they go on to provide a much lengthier explanation. Conditions imposed. The Mets imposed public order conditions on a protest organised by UKIP that was due to take place on Saturday. The conditions prevent anyone taking part in London Borough of Tower Hamlets. They've been imposed to prevent serious disorder and serious disruption. Breaching the conditions or encouraging others to do so is an arrestable offence. Now, importantly, they go on here to say they've encouraged UKIP to consider the very real likelihood that their presence in Whitechapel could lead to serious disruption or serious disorder, and to consider an alternative proposal. We are not saying that the UKIP protest in isolation will be disorderly, but we do know that many will find it provocative and that provocation is likely to lead to an adverse local reaction. So local area people are likely to act violently in response to their protest being there. We reasonably believe, based on information available on previous similar incidents, that coming together, etc., is likely to lead to violence and serious disorder. As the police, we just can't just allow that to happen, so we have a choice. We can deploy significant numbers of officers to physically stand between the groups, a situation that will likely result in clashes between protesters and police and so on, risk of injury, etc., which we see as preventable. Alternatively, we can use our powers under the Public Order Act to proactively impose conditions on the protest, prevent UKIP gathering in Tower Hamlets, and avoiding an inevitable clash. But they go on to say it's important to clarify this isn't a ban, because if it were a ban, it was going to be outright unlawful. But you can see how long this explanation is here. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but they go through justification of where it is and what they say is going to happen and so on. And they really justify with maps and illustrations and discussions, etc. They justify moving this elsewhere. But there is already significant case law on the freedom of expression. First of all, for example, we've got Redmond Bate and the DPP, and regard had to be had to the fact that free speech included not only the inoffensive, but the irritating, contentious, eccentric, heretical, the unwelcome, and the provocative, provided it did not tend to provoke violence. So if they had evidence that UKIP was doing something that would tend to provoke violence, and that's not just saying something that other people disagree with and therefore they react violently, that is not sufficient. It is not sufficient to say that someone might react violently, therefore we've got to stop them from going there. That was decided here in a judicial review for this Chief Constable of Gloucestershire, where it was found that police had not acted lawfully in preventing coach passengers reaching the site of a demonstration because it could not be concluded that a breach of the peace was imminent at the time. So in that case, the police stopped the coaches from going, interfering with their rights as a protester under the Human Rights Act, giving rise to the protection under ECHR, etc. So the police had stopped those coaches from going because they said, when you get there, it might get violent. So the police stopped them from going. But the court here said, no, it's got to be an imminent breach of the peace. Breach of the peace is just a fancy word of saying someone's going to get violent or break public order. So the court said, no, it's got to be an imminent threat, not it might happen. If we allow this to go ahead, it might happen. That's not sufficient. So in here, the police had not acted lawfully because they could not demonstrate that the breach of the peace was imminent. Obviously, they will say, but it is imminent because it's going to happen. But no, imminent is like right now. So I'm recording this video. It is not imminent that someone's going to, react negatively to my video because I haven't put it up yet. This might go up today, it might go up tomorrow, it might not go up for weeks. But so it's not imminent. But, imminent is you go into town, you start shouting and the police see that it's imminently going to happen. So they do something about it. There's other case law, such as this one here, the case of Platform. It's an ECHR case where essentially, among other things, even moving a protest elsewhere is a breach of the right to the freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, etc. This was a case where people were campaigning against abortion and so on. And so essentially, there's a whole body of case law that says the freedom of expression can include that which is provocative and, unsettling and whatever, provided it doesn't tend to provoke violence. But provoke violence will be like, you'll get some from me kind of thing. That's the sort of stuff that provokes violence. Just saying, I don't believe in X, whatever X might be. If me shouting, I don't believe in X, if someone doesn't agree with that and they get violent about that, that's not me saying something that tends to provoke violence. That is them reacting violently. And the police cannot ban me from saying that just because someone might get violent with me. Otherwise, as I said, it's a dangerous, slippery slope. And then before you know it, you'll get to a position where just because someone says, I believe in, God, or I am Christian, or whatever, if someone else reacts violently to that, and the police know that they will react violently to that, and therefore the police ban them from saying that, that is unlawful. That is absolutely not justifiable in any sense of the word. And even if the police said, you can say it, but you got to go, way over there and say it where no one else can hear you. That again is infringing on the right to the freedom of assembly, because it's forcing them to go elsewhere and do it and not do it where they want to do it. So, for example, if people were, let's take this whole situation in Iran, where people are protesting outside the embassy. The location, courts have consistently held, the location is absolutely key to a protest. If the Met Police said, no, you can't do that outside the Iranian embassy, you've got to do it in, Wales somewhere, and, nowhere near London or the Iranian embassy, that is obviously entirely defeating the point. If people are protesting there, that is entirely the point. So by forcing them to do it elsewhere is effectively defeating the point of their protest. So it's interfering unlawfully, in my view, with the right to the freedom of expression, freedom to protest, and so on. And so really, broadly speaking, whilst I understand the difficulty the police are in here, they're like, we know that this is going to happen, and therefore, it's really going to cause problems. That is not enough, in my view. Not legal advice, right? But this is not enough, in my view, for the police to say, we know that those groups won't like what's going on, and therefore the coming together of two groups is going to end violently. That is not enough. In my view, that is absolutely not enough for the police to ban it or even to move it elsewhere. And whilst we have news that they are now, they're curtailing and reducing the numbers of the police force, I think this is entirely the wrong approach, because if that's the case, if they really can't keep people safe, we need to increase the police, we need to increase the powers of the police, and maybe even further arm the police. We don't like to talk about arming the police, but maybe that's a necessary step. If people are going to get so violent that the police can't handle it, with all respect, that they have to move it elsewhere, maybe we need to arm up the police and protect and support the police to the degree that they can stand there and, say, you get violent, there are consequences, and prevent the violence from happening, not prevent it from happening by preventing the protest or making the protest happen elsewhere. Those are my views. I understand the police's difficulty here. They're between a rock and a hard place. They know that this is going to happen. They know it's bad, but by moving it elsewhere, it is a slippery slope to say that, well, if someone doesn't like what someone says, all they have to do is threaten violence. All they have to do is jump up and down and shout and scream enough to make enough noise, to threaten enough violence that the police say, actually, we're going to stop that person from doing that and saying that and having their freedom of expression. This is a slippery slope. Where does that end? Where does it end? Where the police say, you must stop doing that, or stop saying that, or do that elsewhere, or indeed, you must do this, or you must do that, because otherwise, this group of people are going to get all annoyed and upset and cause violence because of you. Therefore, you must or must not do these things, either here, there, or anywhere. It's a slippery slope. And whilst I appreciate the difficulty the police have, this, I think, is the wrong approach. I think, firstly, it might well be unlawful, but at the very least, it's going in the wrong direction. It is essentially handing it to groups who, because of their objection, and the combination of those two groups that might lead to violence or likely lead to violence, that they must then prevent it. I think that is wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And obviously there's an air and a sprinkling of my opinions in here, but that's what you're here for. So do subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.